So now we're going to move on to our third session, which goes in depth into the Asian Legal Network itself. First up, we've got Darren Hui and Taran Lee, who will speak more about the ALN's purpose as well as the consensus decision-making structure. We also have Hirati Abegunasekara, who's with us tuning in from Melbourne, who will speak briefly on the importance of vision. Hirati currently works as the Director of the Legal Ethics and Privacy Team at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and has worked in the New Zealand Public Service since 1992. She's deeply passionate about a citizen-centric public service and the responsibilities that go with being a public advisor, so we're really lucky to have her on the line and can't wait to hear more. But first of all, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Darren, who will jump in and speak more about the Asian Legal Network's purpose. Darren.
Sure. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining back from lunch. It's very, very nice. Thanks for the introduction. And we'll jump back in. So, firstly, thank you so much for your tautoko to date already. We're going to jump into what the legal network is really about. And starting with that, it's about launching where we're going to go, and in light of the theme of walking backwards into our future, it's important to contextualize where the Asian Legal Network really started from. And it really was a conversation about 2 or 3 years ago when we were talking to other Asian lawyers over casually law students, and for me it started with the Asian Law Students Association here in Vic. And when we first started off, it was probably in about 2019 when there was talk about whether we were just a professional organization for lawyers after law school who were Asian, or was it something much more social justice focused? And I think from the kōrero today, and also the particular social context that we live in, it's been pretty important to understand that a lot has happened in the last 3 or 4 years. We've seen the rise of white supremacy. We've seen things like the effects of things like March 15th to our Muslim communities. We've seen the rise of Asian hate in relation to things like coronavirus. And we've also seen quite a lot of devastation in terms of the climate as well, and a lot of big changes that I think a lot of people are becoming more and more aware of. And I think that's also shifted the sentiment of all the people we've talked to. Other movements as well have been a huge part of the ALN, ALN's inspiration. It's things like the Me Too movement, it's things like Black Lives Matter, and these things have made a difference because they show that history does catch up at the end of the day. That history does turn its head, and if we don't get it right now, we will have to correct it in the future. And I think those things have really rallied a lot of what the ALN has gone towards, and that's the future that we're heading towards. And we also see that communities are moving and mobilizing together in ways that they haven't done so before. Our conversations today have probably reflected that Asian peoples are thinking about our relationship with tangata whenua, for instance, that we have groups like Asian Sporting Tino Rangatiratanga that are growing in numbers because people realize that we have to confront this past in order to get to a better future, even if it looks like really difficult things that we have to confront. So that is something that is quite important, that has shaped, I think, our purpose, is that we need to think about the past in order to get to where we want to go. So hopefully everyone can see our purpose, and with it, we want to make Aotearoa a more just, equitable and aspirational place to be. The first part of these 3 interrelated prongs is fostering belonging in Aotearoa, and that's really the starting point. There are Asian lawyers in Asia, Asian lawyers on Turtle Island, continental United States, Asian lawyers in Europe, but what makes the Asian Legal Network here special and different, and in Justice Joe's words, that the land changes us, we need to be thinking very hard about strengthening our relationship and upholding our obligations as well to the land, its First Peoples, and also to Moana Nui Kiwa. Where do we fit in the bigger picture as well? Following on from that, that necessarily shapes and interrelates with exploring Asian identities, because we also have to realize that this is an iterative relationship and process, that there are ways in which we have to think about how we fit into the rest of Asia, and also thinking about the intersections of identities as well. And that's going to be very important in terms of where we want to go. We don't want to just be Asian lawyers in terms of whakapapa and where we're from and just think in the Pākehā way. And that's also reflected in quite a lot of things that the Asian Legal Network has done to date. For instance, every meeting and every catch-up that we had last year was all at people's houses, for instance. We had really, people like Heranti as well, many senior lawyers who were kind enough to open up their houses. And that was important because spaces change, and food in particular for Asian peoples is something that's really important. And so how we do things and how we express our identities and where we are is very important to what the Asian Legal Network does. Otherwise, we would just be copying what is already there. And the last thing that ties all these things together is that we're not just there, in our armchair as philosophers thinking about what Asian identity is. There is very much, at the end of the day, a very concrete thing that we want to do. And that's furthering justice in, Aotearoa. That looks at things like viewing our work through a tino rangatiratanga lens. And that was something that was added at the end, and something that the planning group, after this, we will need to sit down and really think through what that means in an informed way. It also means that from that basis of understanding our place here, we can then center Asian communities and their voices. That means we have to be on the ground. That means we will have to think about how we platform and advocate for Asian communities, and I'll get to what that might look like in our vision. And importantly, the context that we're looking at as we project into the future is to realize that there are substantive laws that might not be substantive laws that might not be up to scratch. There might be legal processes that create access to justice issues. And importantly, when we think about the fact that Asian communities will make up about 25% of the population in the next 20 years, we have to think really hard about issues of access to of legitimacy and rule of law. What does that look like? Do we have a judiciary that most of New Zealand, and Asians in particular, can buy into and see legitimacy, or do they see that they won't have their justice served in court, whether that's in reality or in perception? And we need to think about that access to justice as well. That's something that the Chief Justice has talked about. That's a riddle also for us from Justice Joe as to what that might look like. So this is the purpose that has to be the driving force of the Asian Legal Network that the organizing team has sat down. We've had 4 or 5 planning days talking about this. And look, this purpose is effectively the framework from which we go. It can't afford to be just a networking group. It can't afford just to sit on the sidelines and just benefit Asian lawyers. And that's why this group isn't just for Asian lawyers. It's about anyone who wants to use the law, but also think about justice in a much broader sense as we foster belonging to this land, navigate our identities, and most importantly, further justice and further the ends of justice. So before I get into vision, I'd love to pass it on to Heranti to give us a sort of her perspective on the importance of vision. And just for anyone who's joining us, just make sure your mics are turned off if possible. Kia ora. Heranti, I'll pass it on to you.
Okay. Kia ora koutou, everybody. It's lovely to be with all of you, even though I'm here virtually. I guess all of you are, but I'm here in Melbourne visiting my family. And yes, Darren's asked me to talk to you about vision. And as Darren said, we look at the past to walk into the future, and that's such a lovely concept and a way of thinking about where you're going on this journey. So vision is different to purpose in the sense that the purpose is about the why. And of course you have thought a great deal about the why. And the next thing is to have a vision to help you get on this journey. So often when people come together for a cause, they have different drivers that bring them together. But once you get together, you need a common vision, because it is the vision that provides the guidance about the future that you want to stimulate. The vision is what you aspire to become, to achieve, to create, and in my opinion, that needs to be really, really bold. Vision is the creation of a future, and it's not a prediction. It needs to look very different to what it is now. What is important to you and what is core to you will drive that vision. Don't be scared to dream. I believe that you have already because you've already started thinking about vision, and I think you have such a wonderful group of people out there, and the people who have joined us at this meeting, at this Hui, I'm sure you will understand what I'm saying when I say you've got to dream big. It's got to be big and scary, and it's something that you really, really want, but nothing should hold you back. And so my advice to you today, as you start talking about vision, is to have an unreasonable level of confidence and commitment and resilience. And with that, you will be able to have the vision that will help you progress on this journey and make it happen. And if there's anybody who can do it, it's you guys. So good luck for today, and I hope it goes well. Back to you, Darren.
Thank you, Heranti. And that's something that, yeah, I really want to talk on that message. And Heranti as well has been a big supporter of what we've done. And I think that's important, is to realize that this is not a young person's network. It's not just for people who are just out of university. This has to be a collective thing. And so on behalf of the organizing team, Heranti, ngā mihi nunui, thank you so much for your tautoko and your support. And I really do hope you take the time as well to enjoy your time in Melbourne and with your grandkids as well. That whanaunga time is really important. So ngā mihi, thank you so much.
You guys.
Thank you. So this collective vision is not one person's dream. It has been worked on for over the last couple of years. We've collated and talked to over about 200 lawyers, law students. Not all of them Asian either. And this is something that still needs to be built on, but there's some common themes that we can talk about and really aspire to. And this direction is where we should head into. It might change here and there, but here are some key ideas that we all need to think about. And it's not just about, oh, what we're going to do next week or next month or next year. Where we're going to go is our 20-year plan. We're going to look at what 20 years could look like. Be bold. We might not get there, but the bigger we are, the bolder we are, the more unreasonable our confidence, the further we'll get. And you have to think about, as Justice Joe might say, how other communities have been, how they've lived their vision, and what that could mean for us. Think about 20 years ago where Te Reo Māori was. Think about how unreasonable Ihu Mātau is to have so many communities, not just Māori communities, but many others coming and say, hey, this is unjust, and we want the government to do something about it. So we need to be bold when we think of our kids' kids, in 20 years' time. What would they have hoped that we're dreaming today? And hopefully we haven't even gone far enough. And that's where we need to go. So where do we want to go? Here are some 5 big themes that come up. Let's start with one that I think a lot of people agree with. It's reflected in our last question to Justice Joe. So whoever asked that one, kia ora. That's a very important question. What does the judiciary look like? What do the people look like at least within the legal realm, the top echelons of our legal system? Well, we don't just want Asian faces on there. We don't just want Asian people who have just gone the normal path to become a judge, to be that top echelons. We need judges and lawyers in the future, like when we think about people like Judge Tan, to be in the community. We need people who embody what Asian values look like. And we don't even know what that fully means yet, given the diversity of Asians, the complexities of our identities. But we definitely know that when we get more Asian people, they can't just copy the same pathways, because we would just end up with the same results. people need to think differently. So if you're a person who's aspiring to be a judge, in the future, if you're aspiring to be someone in the top echelons, then you should really think about what is the difference that you guys are all making to that vision. Legal processes is going to be a very important one that's come up time and time again. Do we think the legal processes work right now, or are there ways that we can mainstream ideas that are Asian community based, things around the community, instead of mediations, say, and partner with MB, instead of mediations between one-on-one persons, can we bring in the community? Are there ways to think about alternative dispute resolution that can actually also change and actually take away the burden that is already on our court system? Can Asian lawyers, Asian communities play a role in that? And in so doing, can that interface with the courts so that we bring in other ways, whether that's through interpreters, whether that's through thinking about how evidence law is articulated? And that gets me on to that next point, which is about substantive law and policy. What things might we want to see? We will look at presentations of our upcoming scholarship in our next few sessions about rethinking something like family violence, because we have to put ourselves in the shoes of someone who is a migrant, who is possibly being exploited at work, who might not have the ability to navigate our complex legal systems, and ask, where is the justice for that person and how do they go about finding it? And we need to think about how law processes and substantive laws and policies play a role in that. And that goes back to that conversation about intersectionality. What happens when there are so many intersections to deal with? Class, immigration status, maybe age. And we need to find the most vulnerable, the people who have been disenfranchised the most, and that should be the starting point. It's not just about the lawyers who are doing the best right now and promoting them. It's also about thinking about how can we change these systems and substantive laws, and that has to be a part of our vision. So we want to look at things like mainstreaming, alternative dispute resolution, and displacing individualism in the law. And then there are the last two ones, and these are the really big picture questions. What does decolonizing the law mean? From our first two discussions, decolonization is not just something for other people to deal with. It's not for other ethnic minorities or indigenous peoples. That involves us. And according to Justice Joe, right, everyone, including Pākehā, have had something to gain from the decolonizing process to figure out who we are. And that gets us on to the bigger question. What does the Constitution look like? What sort of transformations might happen? Because whether we agree with it or not, as a network, as individuals, this could potentially mark the biggest shift in constitutional law, and that constitution could shape substantive laws. And if we're not having that conversation now, Asian people will get left out. Asian people will again fall on the sidelines. We will again be there will be the Pākehā world and the Māori world, and where will we be in that? So whether we agree with it or not, we should take it as one of a very significant shift that may happen. And we need to start figuring out what that vision could look like and how that impacts Asian peoples. The next 3 to 15 years, in order to achieve that, stepping backwards, is to ask what we need. How do we take action? How do we actually put this stuff into practice? And that comes into 3 big ideas. The first is advocacy. That's something that many lawyers, law students, people who are even community workers are doing. And how do we make our network an advocacy platform for that? That looks like things like, and we've talked to Justice Joe about this, intervening in the court cases. And again, it's drawing inspiration from groups like Te Hunga Roia, who have done so in cases like the Alice case in the Supreme Court and others. And we need to think about doing that. We need to be thinking about bringing our expertise to the courts, because that again buys into that last bit of our purpose, to better the rule of law, to better the legal system. We need to be talking to judges, talking to the judiciary, talking to all practitioners, and being the source of that advocacy. That advocacy doesn't say in the courts, it looks like policy. That advocacy probably looks like community work as well. And we've been talking to a few community groups as well, and they have ideas about law reform. And being an Asian legal network is something that we can offer in a very tangible, practical way to our communities, as long as those communities are centered. We need to be thinking about education to our own communities as well. And we also need to be thinking about education to the profession, as I mentioned. And importantly, to uphold this vision of the 20 years, if we want a good judiciary, if we want good substantive laws, there needs to be a thriving Asian jurisprudence in Aotearoa. Not just critical race theory, which it stands as an important starting point, but we need the jurisprudence, and that's why our scholarship speakers are so important, because they are sowing the seeds that hopefully others will layer on what that body looks like. We will be debating each other. There will be differences. There will be lots of arguments, and we need to make sure that this jurisprudence is alive, it's based with our communities, it's intersectional, and there should be an expectation that if we're going to talk about our communities, it should be with our communities. We need to be starting with them, and once we've researched on them, that should be done in partnership and fed back to them. And so before we get to all that, we need to build our foundations. It's no surprise that the first two sessions today was about looking at history and our relationship with the land, Te Ao Māori and Tangata Whenua. Because we get that relationship wrong or forget to think about it, we'll be like most organizations now that are playing catch-up. And that's not something we can do or afford to do, because we'll be playing that same game of divide and conquer where different groups are pitted against one another. And that needs to be, again, the intersectional lens of how these identities clash, intersect, layer upon each other, and that should be the starting point. So the key things are things like our relationships. There are things like community engagement and buy-in. We need to have the legitimacy of our communities. We want to set up preliminary practice groups as well, because we don't want to leave all that doing to the future. So there will be things like immigration law that needs urgent responses. There will be family law reforms. There'll be lots of reforms on the way. And importantly, we need to think about our relationships not just as obligations, but also as opportunities. And this is a very important point that has been touched on before, and I want to mihi to people like Aramarata and Tahu Kukutai for some of their writing, where I think it's a very generous and important view of, well, what if we viewed our relationships not just as obligations to Te Tiriti, but imagine if immigration law was completely transformed, where things like manakitanga were central to that. Would we be in an immigration policy where, in an immigration framework where we're forced to assimilate into the system to buy our citizenship? Or is it about manakitanga? Is it about whanaungatanga? Is it about these values which Matua Meng and Justice Joe have talked about that could potentially reshape how we think about these things? So when these practice groups set up, they can't just be thinking in the narrow, oh, let's just tinker with the Immigration Act. Let's think about first principles. Let's think about where we want to go in 20 years and what possible brave changes we as lawyers and advocates and community workers can advocate for. And again, it's also the planting the seed of our scholarship. That's going to be important. So there are several themes that we need to continue to make. These aren't tick boxes. These are things that have to endure. It starts with our relationships. It starts with that of Tangata Whenua, and that as well to our intersectional Asian communities. Let's be frank. In Aotearoa, Asian denotes people that look like me. In places like the UK, people from South Asia. So we are dealing with the fact that in our group, we have to be intersectional, not just in terms of colorism, that is the prejudice on the basis of different, the fairness of one's skin, but also how things like class play out, how things like power dynamics, because we're not one peoples, we're a collection of many peoples. And we need to navigate the world, because in 20 years' time, that's going to matter. If we don't take the fact that we need to be not just representational, but also understanding the power dynamics, if we don't do that, then the judges in the future are probably going to look more like me than most of the other groups. We don't think about gender dynamics. We don't think about our gender minorities. Then what is the law? What are the judges going to look like? And what agenda is it going to fit? So we need to start with that today. That's why it might be slow. That's why we work twice as hard maybe to bring in as many people to this journey, because those relationships will shape the future. We need to build a knowledge base and Asian jurisprudence, and that's going to build and build. Now, it's not just a knowledge base in a philosophical sense. It has to be a tangible one, and it has to be in the community with people with real lived experiences. And that's why we started with Judge Tan's video in these intersections of worlds. And lastly, we need a pipeline of people. So again, a mihi to anyone who has the aspirations to be our next public servants, our next judges, lawyers, QCs, great. but be in the community now. Join this group and be out there, be on the ground. Because by the time you are there, in 20 years' time, you'll be a better judge, you'll be a better lawyer, you'll be a better public servant, you'll be a better person as well. That would be my argument. So the key thing is this: everyone's on their own journey as well. Some people are new, and to all of you, a mihi to you, or thank you for joining us and putting in the time this Saturday. It might not be for everyone right now, but there will be something in the network that hopefully will resonate. Is it about Asian identity? Is it about justice? Is it about figuring out what are we doing here when in this huge tatiriti and also like change with Te Ao Māori is becoming bigger and bigger, particularly in the law. If you have questions about that and you want to find the answers, if you want to figure out Asian identity, and most importantly, if you want to make a difference and realizing that all three things are actually very intimately connected, then I would hugely encourage you, and so does the whole organizing team, to join us. So I hope you will, and it's going to be a very exciting journey. It'll be a big one, but it will be meaningful. And so I hope to see you at our next event. Ngā mihi nui, and I will pass it on now to Tao Tao, who will talk about the mechanics of how we're going to operate, how to bring these values to life. So I'll pass it on now. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Darren. I'm Tao Tao, and I'm here to present to you all the decision-making process which the ALN is going to adopt. This is a topic for all of you political nerds out there. I'm sure it will excite you, but actually it's a topic which really will form the foundation for the values of our network. Before I get into it, I just want to give a shout out to the team that is behind it all. And this is the team that has been behind really the nuts and bolts of the machinery. We have argued tirelessly about points large and small and traversed many tangents. So without further ado, apologies. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, everyone, about the PowerPoint tech issues. I think we'll skip that for now. But really, I just want to give a shout out to the members of the team behind talking about the consensus decision-making process. And that's Darren, Amrand, Tasia, Amy, and myself. So, what is consensus decision-making, or CDM? Well, the name really speaks for itself. It's a decision-making process whereby all parties need to agree on a course of action. Now, this is radical. It is a radical form of organisational decision-making process. It doesn't operate on a traditional majoritarian and individual model. What this really rests on is all of our members functioning as a single organism. Now, why have this, you ask? To be honest, my first thoughts when I heard about this concept was that it was going to be tiresome, tedious, and nothing will ever get done in the network. But it's something that we and I really believe in, because in many ways, the consensus ethos forms the foundation for our own ethos. First of all, it recognises the plurality and intersectionality of Asian communities. What we're doing is we are platforming the smallest voices in the room. Majoritarian processes have always had the tendency to sideline minorities. Minorities are already left out of the conversation by reason of being a minority in and of itself. Secondly, this actually improves the quality of the decision in question. I can't actually quote where this is from, but I did hear that the quality of, this is a nice formula, the quality of a decision can be said to be the quality of thinking multiplied by the level of acceptance. And what is the level of acceptance? Well, to us it means everyone is on board with a decision. We want that. What is the quality of thinking? What does that mean? Well, on one hand, it means that everyone is engaged with the process. Two, it means it looks like every member actively thinking about whether or not they should be abstaining from an issue because it disproportionately affects one group more than the other. And this, in effect, addresses the inequalities of representation. So, it forces us all to think about the community and how issues affect other groups. I want to give a nice example of how this will look like. And I think actually the person who the best example is really the rangatira himself, Justice Joe, but because of our tech issues, I think we'll skip that for now. And I will just go straight into talking about how this will look like in action. So, can you stay here? Good, great, we have the graph. We have been talking about how we want this to operate as a single organism. Well, I've always thought of this graph as really nice because it, to me, looks like a cell. We're going to jump straight into the nucleus of the cell, and that is the green thing you can see here. That's the planning group. And it is the nucleus because this is where the decisions will be made. This is the focal point of the network, and it's where consensus will be playing out. Next, if you look in the nucleus, the yellow is the operational team. That's the operational secretariat of the network. And the OT will act on all operational decisions, such as the use of funds or planning social events. And here, it kind of looks like maybe a mitochondrion. It's the areas of law practice group. And this is the output arms of the network. And there's going to be two main outputs, research and advocacy, both done for the Asian community. And finally, you can see here on the side, it's on the outer ring of the cell, and that's the advisory group. It's on the outer ring because there is a level of independence. It's an independent arm. We want it to be above organisational politics because they are our advisors. They are our long-term review group. Now, there's going to be two types of decisions. I won't go into this overwhelming graph too much, but really the main thing to emphasise is there are going to be two types of decisions. There's going to be operational decisions and major decisions. And major decisions can be urgent or non-urgent. What's really important about either decision is the fact that both can be blocked or paused by any member of the planning group, not just the planning group itself. Now, we believe this is going to work because all stages of this is going to be carried out with good faith, respect, and deference. Now, are we perfect? No, we are not perfect. We have been talking about this idea for 9 months, maybe even more. However, it is an iterative process to review and play out. This needs to play out in practice for us to review how this will look like, how this will best serve our group. That's why we want to have a review in 6 months. In 6 months, we will be listening to you. We want to hear your views about what we can improve on. We recognise that we could have adopted an easier process, an easier approach, but it's not about ease. We're willing to work through the difficulties because we believe in this process, and we believe in it because we think the way to change structural racism is through change in the structure itself. I'm going to hand you over to Tasia now.
Right, thanks, Tata. That was really good. I'm going to see if we could try and play that video that you had, because that's really good. And I think that's, so we'll see if we can just quickly get that video up and playing, and then we'll go from there.
Wai, tino rere ke te rangatira tanga Māori me te leadership Pākehā. Tino rere ke ra wātu. I've heard lots of stories about the way, and seen lots of things about the way rangatira Māori operated. You know, in my time, not in Te Aotahito, in my time. I remember Eddie Jury telling me about the time that Ngāti Tūwharetoa were trying to kohi their whenua to create what became the Lake Taupo Forest Trust, because, you know, all their lands were run separately, and, you know, nui ngā whenua Ngāti Tūwharetoa, all their lands were run separately, tēnā hapu, tēnā whānau, tēnā hapu, tēnā whānau. Anyway, Hepi Te Heuheu, who was the ariki in those days, Tungu's father, called the Hui to get them to amalgamate their operation into a single trust. And they had one of those Hui at Waihi. Or maybe it was Hirangi, I can't remember which. And they put it to a vote. Everyone agreed, except one whānau. So 20% were opposed. 80% agreed, 20% were opposed. And so the result was given to Hepi, and he read it out. The motion is that the lands of blah, 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 blah be put together with the other Lake Taupo lands and run as a single unit. In favour, 80%, against 20%. The motion is lost. And there was silence. Because, you know, in any Pākehā hui, an 80-20 is a win, like a big win. But Hepi knew that he couldn't afford to have a whānau outside the game, you know, because it wasn't just 20% votes, it was a whānau, right? Because he thought like a rangatira, he thought like a whanaungatanga man. He didn't think like an accountant. Anyway, they all go out, you know, because the whole thing's fallen apart. They go and have their cup of tea. The whānau has a meeting. Changed its mind. Whakamā. You know, because they'd been recognised, you know, their mana had been recognised, and it was 100%. And Hepi knew that's what was going to happen. You know, so he thought, you know, rangatiratanga Māori is about whanaungatanga. You know what I mean? That's a perfect example of it, where the job of the rangatira is to bring the people together and to maintain consensus. And you can't have consensus if you've got one whānau out. That may mean the decision-making process is slow, but you know at the end it's going to stick. So that's one good example. And there are hundreds of others of the way rangatira handle themselves, which is not the way an individualistic form of Pākehā leadership would handle itself. Because, I think it's because the rangatira Māori understood that they're dealing with a single organism, you know. This community is not, you don't vote in or out of this community, you're in. You're born in, you die in. And your children and their children are born in and die in. So you must, the whole point in rangatiratanga is to hold the cohesion of that unit, no matter what. Nothing is more important than the cohesion of that unit. And Pākehā leadership doesn't really operate like that. It's happy to divide and conquer as a way of getting things done. It's happy to forget its past in order to rush into the future. Whereas rangatiratanga Māori rushes into the past for fear that the future might represent a threat to the cohesion of that whānau or hapu or iwi organism. That's the difference, I think. It's one of them.